Hello, history class for South Dakota District. Our last session will be on the 17th of September in Pierre. But before then, over the next couple of weeks, month and a half, I would like to just do the history of the Lutheran Church. We're going to start with the years right after the Reformation, 1517 and following, and then continue on to the present day. I know the last couple of things I'm going to say about the Lutheran Church in America, that is going to be designated as class time. Those are the relevant facts that we here in South Dakota still work with and have dealings with. But between 1517 and 1521, this period of time is known as what is the Pope going to do with Martin Luther? Martin Luther had published the 95 Theses, and the Catholic Church sent a person by the name of John Eck to come and ask him questions on what he actually meant by his 95 Theses. Luther, during this time, had come to the conclusion he needed to be proved by two things. He would be proved by Scripture if he was wrong, or by the church fathers. He had to have both, and Scripture was the one that he counted on most. So the Emperor, Charles V, finally decided in 1520 they were going to have what is called a convocation, or its official title is Diet at Worms, Germany, where Luther would be brought before the emperor and everybody and asked to recant of what he had written. Now, between the time of the posting of the 95 Theses and 1520, Luther read more Scripture and had studied the church fathers more, and he had come to the conclusion that he was right, that indulgences and other practices of the Roman Catholic Church of the day needed to be changed. Luther did not want to break away from the church. But every time he was asked before 1521 about his statements, nobody could prove him wrong. So in 1521, the Diet of Worms is having John Eck and Luther. And the two go back and forth arguing points of doctrine. And finally, Luther is brought to the point of saying, you are to recant of what you have said. Luther, it's towards the end of the day, finally says, can I give you my answer tomorrow? Well, over the evening he prays, he talks to the people with him. And the next day is where Martin Luther gives the famous speech that you can look up, and it's actually the title of the book you can read on this, Here I Stand, where he stands before the emperor and John Eck and everybody and says to them, I stand here on Scripture. And the famous statement is, I cannot go against Scripture and my conscience. And so Luther clearly states he is standing on Scripture. And his conscience would not allow him to deviate from that. Scripture was that important that he knew that is where he wanted to be standing. The aftermath of Luther's statements were that the emperor put a price on his head, and his elector, right after the Diet of Worms, rushed him off to a castle. And Luther was called Knight George for the next 2 years because they didn't really want him to be known where he was. And during that period of time is when Martin Luther translated the New Testament and the Old Testament into German. He got this published and sent out. This is Luther's big task while he was being hid. During this time, Luther and the other reformers in Germany were in contact with the reformers in Geneva, Switzerland. They were led by John Calvin. And Calvin's friend, person by the name of Zwingli, was also one of the reformers. They didn't want to break off and make a whole bunch of different churches, so they wanted Luther and Calvin and Zwingli to come together. Unfortunately, Calvin couldn't make it, but Zwingli and Luther came together. This was 1529. It's called the Colloquy at Marburg. This is another famous period where Luther, before he had started this, he wrote on the table, "This is my body." Wrote it in Greek. And the day progressed with Zwingli and Luther going back and forth on all sorts of different types of doctrine. Now, the doctrines were on baptism, on Christ, on the Trinity. All of these, they came to an agreement. And the last doctrine they were getting to is the doctrine of the Lord's Supper. The phrase, "This is my body." And Luther found out that sooner or later that Zwingli did not quite understand the phrase, "This is," the same as Luther. So when Luther looked down and showed this phrase to Zwingli, Zwingli said, well, the word "is" means represents, symbolizes. And Martin Luther then said, well, we definitely don't agree then on the two natures of Christ. And that is what truly happened, why Luther and Zwingli, or the Reformation in Switzerland, could not get together, is because Luther's view, "This is my body," as we understand it today, Christ is truly present in his body and blood at the Lord's Supper. Luther was very clear by the end of the Marburg Colloquy, that's what he meant.